Picture this, it's the dead of winter in the 1200s. The wind isn't just cold, it bites. It slips through cracks in wooden walls, howls down stone alleyways, and turns every breath into mist. Snow piles high against the doors of cottages, and the rivers have frozen into glass. In a world without central heating, puffy jackets, or even socks as we know them, one thing matters more than anything else: warmth. And warmth, back then, wasn't something you bought. It was something you built, with your hands, your patience, and whatever nature gave you. Let me take you to a small village in 13th century England. We'll call it Wenton. Life here is simple and harsh. Most people are farmers or shepherds, and in one of these tiny cottages, with smoke curling from a thatched roof, lives a woman named Alice. Her husband is out mending a fence. Her 2 children sleep under layers of rough wool blankets. And she's sitting near the fire, spinning wool by hand. Because if she doesn't, her family might not survive the winter. This isn't a hobby. This isn't a craft project. This is life or death. Everything starts in the spring, long before the first snow falls. When the days grow warmer and the sheep's heavy winter coats are no longer needed, men shear them with iron shears. Clumsy tools that nick fingers and sometimes skin. The wool that comes off is filthy, caked with mud, sweat, grease, and dung. But inside that mess is the key to survival. The wool is washed in cold water, pounded against stones, and beaten clean in rivers. Once dry, it's still a tangled mess, so Alice and the other women take wooden paddles covered with metal teeth, called carders, and brush it again and again until it's soft, light, and ready to spin. It takes hours, days, but every handful of cleaned wool is a small step closer to warmth. And it's not just in England. Across Europe, from the misty hills of Scotland to the snowy plains of Poland, families follow this same ritual. Sheep were more than animals, they were lifelines. English wool was coarse and strong, perfect for cloaks that could shrug off rain and snow. In the warmer south, Italian and Spanish sheep produced finer, softer fibers used by the wealthy for flowing gowns and robes. Even in something as basic as wool, there was a social divide. The rich wore what was soft and shining. The poor wore what scratched and lasted. Now the real work begins. Alice sets her distaff, a stick holding the carded wool, beside her. In her other hand, she spins a simple wooden spindle. Slowly, carefully, she twists the fibers into yarn. It's delicate work. Too much twist and the yarn snaps. Too little and it unravels. But with time and skill, the wool transforms from fluff into strong, workable thread. And she's not alone. Across the village, other women do the same. In fact, spinning was so common that the word spinster originally just meant woman who spins. By the end of the season, Alice might spin miles of yarn, enough to clothe her family from head to toe. Once the yarn is ready, it's time for weaving. Alice's husband helps set up a large wooden loom in their cottage. It's a heavy, clunky machine, but it's magical in what it creates. Each time the shuttle slides back and forth, threads cross and lock together. Slowly, inch by inch, a piece of fabric takes shape. The sound, the rhythmic clack of wood, becomes the heartbeat of the home. For the poor, this fabric is plain and tough. It's thick, gray, and heavy, perfect for tunics, cloaks, and hoods that must survive hard work and bad weather. The wealthy, meanwhile, pay skilled weavers in towns to create patterned cloth, sometimes decorated with silk threads or embroidered with gold. In monasteries, weaving becomes almost a sacred art. Monks create habits of undyed wool, plain but perfectly suited to life in cold stone buildings. Their robes are more than uniforms. They're shields against the cold. Freshly woven fabric isn't much to look at. It's dull, pale, and rough. That's where the dyers come in. Part scientist, part sorcerer. Their workshops reek of boiling pots and strange brews. Everything is done with natural ingredients: woad leaves for deep blues, madder roots for rich reds, walnut shells for browns, onion skins for gold, and oak bark for dark, earthy tones. The process is slow and precise. Dyers guard their recipes like secrets. A small change in temperature or timing can ruin an entire batch. But when done right, a plain piece of cloth becomes something beautiful. And for the wealthy, color is power. A crimson cloak or deep blue gown isn't just warm. It's a statement of wealth and status. But dyeing is only half the story. Cloth straight off the loom is still weak and loose. It needs to be fulled, thickened, cleaned, and strengthened. And this is where things get a little unpleasant. Fullers soak the fabric in water mixed with soap. Or, more often, stale urine. Yes, you heard that right. Urine was a natural source of ammonia, perfect for breaking down grease and binding fibers. Workers stomped on the soaked fabric with their bare feet for hours, beating it into a dense, weather-resistant material. It was disgusting, exhausting work, but absolutely vital. Once fulled, the cloth is brushed with teasel heads, spiky plants that lift the fibers and create a soft, fuzzy finish. Then it's pressed flat between hot stones or wrapped around wooden poles and dried in the open air. By the end, the cloth is no longer fragile. It's strong, warm, and ready to become clothing. This is where craftsmanship meets creativity. Tailors, often members of tightly controlled guilds, take the finished cloth and turn it into garments. Their tools are simple iron shears, bone needles, chalk, and thread. But their work is extraordinary. For nobles, clothing isn't just about warmth. It's a symbol of power. A lord might wear a floor-length cloak lined with fox or ermine fur, clasped with a bronze brooch. A lady's gown could include silk underlayers and velvet mantles, dyed in colors so expensive they're worth more than a peasant's yearly income. Gloves are made from soft leather. Boots are trimmed with fur, and every detail is a display of wealth. Peasants like Alice and her family wear simpler clothes, a thick wool tunic, a hood that covers the head and shoulders, and a cloak tied with a cord. These garments are patched and layered, repaired again and again, until the fabric finally gives out. But they do the job. They keep people warm enough to plow fields, feed animals, and survive the bitterest nights. The further north you go, the harsher it gets, and the more creative people become. In Scandinavia and the Baltic lands, reindeer hides are turned into coats, sealskin into mittens, and moss is stuffed into boots for insulation. Hoods and hats are lined with sheepskin, worn fur side, into trap body heat. Nothing is wasted. Every fiber, every scrap of hide, every strip of fur is used to fight the cold. But here's something that's easy to overlook. Surviving a medieval winter wasn't just about materials and tools. It was about people, about community. On long winter nights, women gather around the fire to spin together, sharing stories, songs, and laughter. Dyers, fullers, and tailors work side by side in town workshops, their skills intertwined like the threads they handle. In castles, servants repair torn cloaks by candlelight. In cottages, mothers patch their children's tunics. In monasteries, monks sew their robes in silent devotion. Every stitch is an act of resistance, a small victory over the cold and darkness. It's easy to forget, now that we can order winter clothes online and warm our homes with the turn of a dial, just how much work went into staying alive back then. A single garment could take weeks or months to make. Every stage, from shearing sheep to dyeing fabric, required time, effort, and skill. And for many families, clothing wasn't something new each season. It was repaired, handed down, and repurposed until it literally fell apart. A child might wear a tunic first made for an older sibling. A man's cloak might be patched with scraps from his father's coat. Nothing was wasted because nothing could be. Even the wealthy, despite their silks and velvets, depended on the same basic materials and techniques as everyone else. Wool, linen, leather, fur, all born from the land and shaped by human hands.